One of the biggest changes that's taken place so far under the Trump administration for marriage-based green card applicants doing the adjustment of status process within the United States is that every case is being scheduled for an interview, which is a big contrast from how things were operating just a year ago, where if you had a ton of evidence that your marriage was in good faith, they could waive the interview and you wouldn't need to show up. You would just get an approval notice and your green card in the mail, which was pretty amazing for a lot of people. So now that every case is being scheduled for an interview, all of my clients, once it gets to the interview stage, once we get the interview notice that says like your interview is scheduled 6 weeks from now, and by the way, one of those notices is in front of me, we will meet to prepare for the interview. And so what I'm gonna be talking about today is how to prepare for your marriage-based adjustment of status interview. Let's start with some preliminary information. So generally speaking, you'll get your interview appointment notice, this thing, about 6 weeks before your interview is actually scheduled. And it'll basically say you and your spouse need to appear together. It'll say the date and time of the interview and what you should generally bring. But the notice isn't that great at explaining what you need to bring, and it is worth speaking with an attorney before you attend the interview if you have any questions or there's confusion. So the first thing that you should understand is 99% of interviews will be a joint interview where it's one immigration officer and the two spouses together in an interview. You won't be separated during the initial interview. Now, if that interview doesn't go well and the immigration officer suspects that the marriage is not in good faith and it's fake merely for an immigration benefit, what will happen is they'll schedule a second interview and they'll wait like a year. And then they'll schedule a second interview where they will do a Stokes interview where they will separate the spouses and ask you the same like 100 to 200 questions looking for major differences in your responses. And it'll be somewhat hostile. It'll be with the USCIS fraud department where they are used to dealing with fake marriages. You definitely don't want that. So be sure to watch the rest of this video to help you avoid the chances of that happening. By the way, if you're going through this process and you need an attorney to consult with, just to strategize, or to handle your whole case from start to finish, you could always reach out directly to me. My information is in the video description below so that you could schedule a consultation. Okay, so when you apply for adjustment of status, what you want to do is submit as much evidence that you're in a good faith marriage with the rest of your applications. That's your I-130, your I-485, the I-864 medical examination, and possibly your I-765 for employment authorization and I-131 for travel documentation. So you're going to submit all of these forms simultaneously with all of the evidence that you're in a good faith marriage. Photographs, bank accounts, car insurance, health insurance, life insurance, evidence of travel together, joint utilities, phone bills, proof you're living together, driver's licenses listing the same address, and tons of other stuff that might be unique to your personal relationship. Now, if you guys just got married and just started living together, you might not have most of this stuff. But, you know, months down the road, when it's time for your interview, by then you might now have many of these documents, especially since now your spouse should have a social security number and employment authorization card, which might help you guys open like a joint bank account. It might help you put your immigrant spouse on your joint health insurance and just, you know, really establish your lives together and get documents to prove that you're sharing your lives together. Once it's time for the interview, you want to look at everything you previously submitted to USCIS with your initial adjustment of status filing. Everything you submitted with the exception of like your medical exam, your passport style photographs, and maybe a check or money order made payable to the Department of Homeland Security, everything else should have been a photocopy. So the first thing to keep in mind is one of the purposes of the interview is to verify the authenticity of these documents. So you need to now bring all of the originals. And any document that you bring an original of, you should also bring another photocopy to the interview. So birth certificates for the immigrant spouse, and if you guys have any kids together, that's amazing evidence that you're in a good faith marriage. Bring the kids' original birth certificates and a photocopy. Marriage certificates, proof that your petitioning spouse is a US citizen. That could be a certificate of naturalization or an original US birth certificate or a US passport, original passport. So These are generally the original documents you want to bring. Oh, also, if you guys have, either of you have previously been divorced, you need to bring in a certified copy of the divorce certificates. So these are the mandatory original documents you need to bring, but every case is different. If you submitted other evidence in support of your case and an original document exists, then you need to bring that original document and a photocopy. Let me give you an example. If you guys received holiday cards from friends and family, let's say the spouses are married and you guys, after you got married, you received holiday cards from your spouse's parents saying like, hey, congratulations, your first Christmas together as a married couple. You may have previously submitted a photocopy of that holiday card. You should bring the original and a photocopy to your interview. So the general rule is whenever an original document exists, bring it along with a photocopy. Any document you previously submitted, like a bank statement, if there are updated statements now, you need to bring them with you to the interview. So if you filed your application a few months ago and you had like 3 months of bank statements and you submitted them, now you need to bring the next few months of bank statements with you to your interview, and those are totally fair game for the immigration officer to quiz you on. Like the officer can ask you, like, in the last month, what was your biggest transaction on your bank statement? It's all fair game. And by the way, you could say, I don't know, my spouse is the one who really handles the finances. I do use this joint bank account, but I don't really know the answer to that. I can't remember. Now, one of the confusing things is the interview notice that they send you. So let's go through it just to clarify any confusion that you might have for your interview. So this interview notice, I'm just going to read it to you guys. It says, failure to appear for the scheduled appointment without prior notification and without good cause may result in the denial of your application. If you actually need to reschedule the interview, I recommend calling USCIS a few days before your interview. Health reasons or sickness is generally an acceptable good reason to try to reschedule the interview, but keep in mind, depending on the location, it might take 6, 12, sometimes 18 months for your case to get rescheduled. Sometimes it's much faster, but it's geography specific and depends on the backlogs that the USCIS office is having in that area. So you would call them and they would also give you a confirmation number to confirm that they received your request to reschedule it. It's not 100% guaranteed to get approved, so you're taking some risk when you reschedule. So it continues. You are notified to appear before a USCIS officer regarding the application identified above at the date, time, and place indicated above. Waiting room capacity is limited. Please do not arrive any earlier than 30 minutes before your scheduled appointment time. The proceeding can take about 2 hours. It never takes 2 hours for the initial interview anyway, but whatever, they say that. If you cannot keep this appointment, call the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services contact center at this phone number as soon as possible to reschedule your appointment. And then it says, who should come with you? If your eligibility is based on marriage, your husband or wife must come with you to the interview. If you do not speak English fluently, you should bring an interpreter. Generally speaking, USCIS will use their own telephone interpreter, but if you want your own interpreter, you could also bring your own interpreter. This might change in the future, so generally, if both spouses don't speak fluent English, you should just hedge your bets and bring an interpreter, even if the officer says, I don't want to use your interpreter. Your attorney or authorized representative may come with you to the interview. If your eligibility is based on a parent, son or daughter relationship and the son or daughter is a minor, the petitioning parent and the son or daughter must appear for the interview. Okay, then it gets to the important part. You must bring the following items with you, and then they list a bunch of documents. The first item on the checklist is this interview notice and your government issued photo ID. So literally bring this with you. You're going to need to get into the USCIS government building. You're going to need it once you get to the correct location for your interview to give to the immigration officer so that they can begin processing you. If required, a completed Form I-693 report of medical examination and vaccination report in a sealed envelope, unless already submitted. So this is old language that was on the old version of the forms. It's still on the new version of the forms, but currently, if you haven't submitted valid medical examination, USCIS won't even schedule you for the interview. So 99.9% of people don't need to bring an updated medical exam because it's been previously submitted. If required, bring a completed Form I-864 Affidavit of Support with all required evidence unless already submitted. And then it lists a couple sub points for the Affidavit of Support. So again, If you've made it to the interview, you've already submitted an affidavit of support. It's one of the first things USCIS would have checked once you submitted your green card application, and you wouldn't have made it to the interview if you didn't have a generally acceptable affidavit of support. But this is actually where it gets a little complicated. So in addition to the affidavit of support, they want you to bring federal income tax returns and W-2s or certified IRS printouts for the most recent tax year, letters from your current employer verifying current rate of pay and average weekly hours, and pay stubs for the past 2 months, and evidence of your sponsors and or co-sponsors' U.S. citizenship or lawful permanent resident status. Okay, so if you're doing a marriage-based green card, and your U.S. citizen spouse previously submitted an affidavit of support, which they did, or you wouldn't have gotten this far, and a new tax return is available, you must absolutely bring the updated tax return with W-2s, 1099s, and any federal schedules, or a certified IRS printout. You don't need to bring the IRS printout and the tax return. My preference is to just bring the updated tax return and not the IRS printout. So what I would tell my client is, okay, we submitted the 2023 tax return along with your adjustment of status application. Now that it's past April 15th, for example, the 2024 tax return should be available. So bring your 2024 complete tax return with all federal schedules, W-2s, and 1099s. You do not need to bring letters from each current employer verifying your current rate of pay and average weekly hours and pay stubs for the past 2 months, even though it says you do, unless your income has dramatically changed. And by the way, when I'm talking about tax returns and income and affidavit of support, I'm only talking about the U.S. citizen sponsors tax returns. And if you guys used a joint sponsor, you would also need to bring the updated tax documents for the joint sponsor. This is one of the most complicated parts of this situation. Most of my clients, the vast majority, do not need to bring pay stubs or a letter from the employer, even though the interview notice says they do. They won't ask for it at the interview, generally speaking. Next bullet point says, bring all documentation establishing your eligibility for lawful permanent resident status. This includes, but is not limited to, proof of status as an asylee, refugee, or a fiancé non-immigrant. So this is everything you previously submitted for your adjustment of status application was good enough to get you to an interview, like marriage certificate, birth certificates, tax returns, spouse's birth certificate. All of these documents establish your eligibility for permanent residence, so bring the original and one photocopy. It says bring any immigration-related documentation ever issued to you, including, and then it lists a bunch of stuff. If you've ever received anything from USCIS or the consulate, just bring it with you. 99% chance they will never ask for it. I've actually personally never seen USCIS ask for it, but just bring it with you in an overabundance of caution. Next, all travel documents used to enter the US, including passports, advance parole documents, refugee travel documents, and Form I-94 arrival and departure record. So the I-94 is important because it proves that you entered the US lawfully, or a parole document, which should also be accompanied by an I-94 generally, but not always. So you either want an I-94 or like an entry stamp or proof that you entered with parole. You need something to prove that you entered lawfully, unless you're eligible for something called 245I, which most people are not. That's for people who entered the US before April 30th, 2001 and meet some other requirements. It says if your Form I-485, which is the green card application, is based on a petition filed by a family member, which it is, bring your petitioner's birth certificate and your petitioner's evidence of U.S. citizenship or lawful permanent resident status. So the U.S. citizen spouse should bring their birth certificate and proof they're a U.S. citizen. So the birth certificate, if they were born in the U.S., is proof they're a U.S. citizen. That's all you need to bring. But if they naturalize, they would also need to bring the certificate of naturalization. If you have children, bring a birth certificate for each of them. That makes sense because children are also a great piece of evidence to prove that your marriage was entered into in good faith if those birth certificates are for this marriage. So if you are both the parents on the birth certificate, bring those birth certificates. But even if not, the notice instructs you to bring birth certificates for all children involved. And then there's a section that discusses specifically if your eligibility is based on your marriage, in addition to your husband and wife coming to the interview with you, bring, and then it lists a bunch of stuff. A copy of your marriage document, so the marriage certificate, your husband or wife's birth certificate, your husband or wife's evidence of U.S. citizenship or lawful permanent resident status. So that would be their certificate of naturalization, U.S. birth certificate, U.S. passport, or a green card. If you or your husband or wife were ever married before, all divorce decrees and death certificates for each prior marriage. Super important. You need to establish that you were legally allowed to remarry. It's like one of the main requirements. So you need to bring proof that all prior marriages ended through divorce or death of your spouse, or annulment in some situations. Birth certificates for all children of this marriage, and custody papers for your children and your husband or wife's children not living with you. Supporting evidence of your relationship, such as copies of any documentation regarding joint assets or liabilities you and your husband or wife may have together. This may include tax returns, specifically joint tax returns, but all tax returns need to be brought to the interview. Bank statements, insurance documents, in parentheses, car, life, health insurance. Property documents, in parentheses, car, house, etc. Rental agreements showing you guys have lived together, leased rental together, or are in a mortgage together with both your names on it. Utility bills, credit cards, ideally joint credit cards, any contracts both spouses are a part of, leases, photos, correspondence, and or any other documents you feel may substantiate your relationship. And then next bullet point is the originals and copies of each supporting document that you submitted with your application. Otherwise, we may keep your originals for our records. So earlier I said you need to bring the original and a photocopy of each original document that you bring. If you just bring the original, then it's fair game for USCIS to keep that original document, which is not what you want. If you've ever been arrested, bring the related police report and or original or certified final court disposition for each arrest, even if the cases have been dismissed or expunged. If no court record is available, bring a letter from the court with jurisdiction indicating this. This is super important. So anytime you've been charged with a crime, you need to bring a certificate of disposition. It shows what the charge was for and what the outcome in the case was. If you can't get that, let's say it was 20 years ago in some like tiny municipal court, get a letter from the court on court letterhead, ideally from the clerk's office, that says these records are unavailable, and it should have an original signature from the court clerk. You need to bring that original letter with you to the interview. It should not be a photocopy. It should not be a printout. Try to get the original and bring it with you, or you could have problems at the interview. And then the last bullet point is certified English translation for each foreign language document. The translator must certify they are fluent in both languages and that the translation in its entirety is complete and accurate. So any non-English language, commonly birth certificates, if you were born in a Spanish speaking country or non-English speaking country and your birth certificate is not also in English, then you need to bring a certified English translation. Some people get ripped off purchasing these translations. It doesn't need to be notarized. It doesn't need to have like a stamp or seal. All it needs to be is an accurate translation with one sentence at the end that says something along the lines of, I, name of translator, am competent to translate from, for example, Spanish to English, and I certify that this document is a true and accurate translation of the original. And then it should have an original signature from the translator. It doesn't need to be notarized, and the date. That's enough. Doesn't need to be from a professional translation company. It just needs to be from someone who is competent, not even like fluent or an expert. They just need to be competent in both languages, and they need to certify that at the end of the translation. And then there's a note at the end for asylees and refugees. And then there's another note that says to request a disability accommodation, go to uscis.gov/accommodations or call USCIS contact center as soon as possible. Even if you indicated it on your application that you require an accommodation. And then finally, for questions about your application, you can use our many online tools at uscis.gov/tools, including our virtual assistant, Emma. If you are not able to find the information you need online, you can reach out to USCIS Contact Center by visiting uscis.gov/contact center. So that's the entire interview notice. Much better than the old version of the notices, but you can see how there might be some confusion after you go through this notice. The most important thing is, do not just bring what's on this notice. You definitely need to bring everything that's on this notice, but additionally, if you have other evidence or updated evidence of your good faith marriage, that's really what the immigration officer is focused on. 99% of these interviews is merely to see that the two people sitting in front of the immigration officer plan to share their lives together. That's what it means to be in a good faith marriage. So as long as you're in a good faith marriage and you bring as much documents as possible to prove that you're in a good faith marriage, you're generally in a good position, and rarely will the interview go poorly. And by the way, if it does go poorly, they're just gonna schedule you for a second interview that's gonna be way more hostile in the future to get to the bottom of whether or not this really is a good faith marriage. I say this to all of my clients. In my many years of doing this, I've only had that happen fewer than 5 times. And, most of those times, the couple did not bring evidence to the interview. They did not save evidence as I instructed them, and we knew in advance that they were going to have problems, and I warned them they're going to have problems. If you do a good job preparing your case, generally speaking, these interviews only last like 15 to 30 minutes, and once the immigration officer is convinced that the two people sitting in front of them aren't just creating this elaborate scam and that it really is a real relationship, then usually the interview is over. One final note. At the end of the interview, sometimes the USCIS officer does not tell you whether they're going to approve or deny your case. In fact, more often than not, usually they do not tell you. They'll just say like, okay, the interview's over. Please gather your stuff and follow me. And they'll escort you out, and they'll tell you if we need anything additional, we'll notify you by mail. If once we make a decision, we'll notify you by mail. Generally speaking, a few weeks later, we get the approval notice, and then the green card physically arrives in the mail 1 or 2 weeks after that. So don't stress out if the immigration officer doesn't give you an answer at the interview. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope this helped somebody out there. If you're going through this process yourself and you need any assistance or just want to talk to somebody before your interview, you could schedule a consultation directly with me. And also, if you haven't even started this process and you're just like in the investigation and research phase, and you want to speak with an attorney, or you're not even sure if you want to hire an attorney or if you want to do it yourself and you want to talk with someone before you make that decision, schedule a consultation with me. I would love to speak with you. I'll make sure you get as much value as possible out of the consultation so that you can make the best decision for you and your family. Also, if you're new to my channel, I try to put out several videos each week on family-based immigration, naturalization, and changes to immigration policy under the Trump administration. If you're interested in these topics, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time for another video.